My son David betrayed me, forging documents to grab $400,000 I saved for my retirement. My daughter-in-law, Linda, abused her role as HOA chair to push through a $600,000 project for herself. Family turned into strangers. Greed turned into knives. They thought the old man would just fade away. But I had one thing they didn't expect: proof, and I was ready to use it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the living room, the late afternoon light spilling across the floorboards I had sanded with my own hands decades ago. The air was still, heavy, carrying only the faint tick of the old wall clock that had marked so many ordinary days in this house. Yet nothing about this day felt ordinary. My chest ached not from the surgery scars that still tugged when I breathed too deeply, but from something far heavier, the realization that my own son had turned against me. Betrayal doesn't come like thunder. It creeps in quietly until suddenly you notice the storm has already soaked you through. I let my eyes wander around the room, letting each detail pull me back into memories. On the mantel, Margaret's photograph smiled at me, her veil caught in a soft breeze on the day we promised forever. Beneath that picture sat a brass frame of David cap and gown hanging crookedly as he beamed after his graduation. That smile had cost me $60,000, every tuition check written with a tired hand, every extra shift at the plant, every holiday where I chose to work overtime instead of resting with family. I remembered nights when my body begged me to stop, but I kept going, because a son deserves a chance, and I wanted him to have better. The car outside in the driveway had once been his. A blue Ford sedan, $25,000, was bought with pride the summer he finished school. He wanted to start his career with dignity, to drive into interviews without embarrassment. I handed him the keys with a grin, never telling him how long I'd sat at the bank calculating the loan payments, how many evenings I'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches just to cover the cost. His excitement had been worth it, or so I thought. And then there was the wedding, $50,000, a reception hall with chandeliers, a band that played late into the night, a cake taller than David himself. Linda shone in her gown, eyes glittering as if she'd stepped into a fairy tale. That night I stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching my boy spin his bride in circles, and I told myself the sacrifice was good, that he was happy, and that was enough. But now, when I replay those images, the sweetness curdles. That night wasn't the beginning of trust. It was the beginning of entitlement. I leaned back in the chair Margaret and I had bought second-hand when the kids were young. The cushions sagged in all the places our bodies had settled over the years. My hands gripped the arms until my knuckles whitened. All that I had poured into them, decades of sweat, dollars counted and recounted, now reduced to paperwork with forged signatures, documents designed to erase me from the very home I had built. This house, $600,000 by the last appraisal. More than money, it was the shape of our lives. Margaret and I had painted these walls ourselves, argued over curtain patterns, laughed while trying to install shelves that leaned like drunken sailors until she steadied them with her small but determined hands. Each nail, each corner carried our fingerprints. And now my own son and his wife want to sell it. Sell the heart of our family just to tuck me away in some nursing home, out of sight, out of mind. I stared up at the wedding photo again, the one of Margaret and me. She had chosen to place it above the fireplace because she said warmth belonged under love. That photograph was never meant to be listed as an asset on a spreadsheet, but that's exactly what David and Linda wanted. To them, these walls, these memories, were no more than real estate, something to be liquidated, as if my life's work could be cashed out like coins in a jar. The more I thought, the more the anger burned, hot and sharp. At first it was a hawk. How could my own blood forge my name? How could the daughter-in-law I'd welcomed as family twist her power as HOA chair to push through her own project? But shock only lasts so long before it becomes clarity. And clarity is a hard teacher. I realized something simple. If I did nothing, I would lose everything. I closed my eyes and whispered, almost as if Margaret sat across from me like she once did on evenings when we planned our future. I won't let them erase me. I won't let them erase us. For a moment, I swore I could hear her voice, gentle but steady, telling me to stand, to hold the line. She had always been the anchor, the one who steadied me when storms rose. Now I would have to be my own anchor. The room seemed to lean closer, reminding me of all I stood to lose. The chairs, handmade from oak, I'd cut myself. The old wall clock, its pendulum swinging slowly, like a heartbeat keeping time. The carpet Margaret saved for years to buy, insisting we'd have one thing soft underfoot. Every object was a witness. Every corner whispered of what we had built and what David now dared to dismantle. I pushed myself up and walked to the cabinet in the corner, the one Margaret used to call the vault. Inside, stacked neatly as if she had prepared for this day, were folders of documents, insurance papers, mortgage records, the deed itself. My hands trembled as I pulled the deed free. Heavy paper, stamped, official, carrying proof that my name had roots here. I laid it flat on the table, pressing it with my palm, as if to remind myself, this is mine, ours, not his, not hers. For a long time, I simply stared at it. Each line of ink seemed brighter than before, every word a shield against their greed. Slowly, I slipped it into a folder and then into a leather briefcase I hadn't touched in years. My chest rose and fell with a strange rhythm, not fear anymore, but resolve. Then I reached for the phone. My finger hovered only a second before dialing Kate Johnson. Kate had been my lawyer for years, sharp as a blade, but kind enough to explain every step as if I were family. Her voice, when it came through, was brisk but warm. "George, what's going on?" she asked. I told her. Not every detail, not yet, but enough for her to know this wasn't a small family squabble. This was theft. This was betrayal. This was war. She didn't gasp, didn't scold. She only said, "Bring me the documents tomorrow. We'll start from there." And with those words, a spark lit inside me. I hung up and sat back down, the folder on the table like a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment. For the first time since I discovered the forgery, I felt the ground beneath me hold steady. The helplessness was fading. In its place grew something Margaret would have recognized: determination. I opened the old notebook I had kept since my Navy days. The pages were filled with dates, numbers, reminders, scraps of thought. Tonight I added a new line, careful and deliberate. Tomorrow I begin to fight back. The pen scratched across the paper, louder in the silence than any shout. I closed the book, set the pen on top, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The day had been long, heavy, and bitter, but it ended with direction. They had thought me weak. They had mistaken silence for surrender. But I was not done. Tomorrow would not be just another day. Tomorrow would be the first step toward reclaiming what was mine. I woke before the sky turned gray and let the house speak in small sounds. The radiator ticked. The hallway clock kept honest time. I made coffee, black and steady, and cleared the kitchen table with the flat of my hand. I set down a legal pad, a blue pen, and the thick folder I had carried through yesterday like a life jacket. Yesterday had been a memory and a hurt. Today would be motion, lists, calls, signatures that belonged to me and me alone. I breathed in slowly, the way the cardiac nurse taught me when I wanted to rush. I exhaled, and the room felt square again. I opened the folder and read the deed, even though I know every line. Assessed value, $600,000. Taxes current. No liens. My name is in clean black type. I slid the latest savings statement from its sleeve. The interest line was small but faithful. Then came the wound on paper, the attempted wire I had circled in red last night. $398,412. A supposed authorization sat behind it, carrying a version of my name I have never made. The loops were wrong. The pressure was missing. Whoever wrote it did not hold the pen the way I do when I set my name down, like I mean it. I could have let anger choreograph me. I did not. I slid the papers back into place and snapped the binder rings until they clicked. I told Margaret, in the quiet part of my head where she still keeps me upright, I am moving now. No more waiting to be erased. The clock in the hall answered with a clean tick. Coat, keys, folder. I locked the door and drove to Kate Johnson's office. Kate works out of a square brick building with a brass handle that never warms. The lobby smells like lemon cleaner and paper. Her receptionist knows my face and my habit of arriving 5 minutes early. Kate met me halfway down the hall. She wears calm like a uniform. No fuss, no apology. We sat at her long table. I spread the documents the way you show a mechanic where the knock lives. Deed, bank statements, the forged wire request, photocopies of HOA notices with my name printed and not signed by me, return receipts. I kept my hands flat so the pages would not curl. She read like a craftsperson, steady and exact. She did not talk while she read. She marked a few places with a pencil, not to scar them, but to aim at them. She stopped at the signature that pretended to be mine and angled the page to the light. Your hand sets down and lifts, she said softly. This floats. See the W. See the tail. She tapped the notary block. Missing commission expiration. That is not a small thing. She turned to the routing instructions. They tried to push it from your savings to a new account. A branch accepted the paperwork. Manual review stopped it because the stamp looked wrong. We move now, not later. What first? I asked. I did not add please. She already knew it lived inside the question. Freeze everything outbound, she said. Ask for the fraud unit. Use the words non-authorization and security hold. Add a verbal password that only sits in your head. After that, we notarize your affidavit. I will draft 3 letters today. 1 to the bank, memorializing the call. 1 to the HOA, demanding signature verification on any payment posted under your name. 1 to the UPS store, directing preservation of their mailbox authorization and any camera footage. She slid her phone across the table and nodded once. She slid her phone to me so I could call on speaker. The menu asked what I needed. I said 1 word. Fraud. A human voice took over. This is Morgan with Fraud Prevention. May I have your name and account number? I read the digits. She checked the screen, then said the form had been submitted at a branch and routed for review because the stamp looked wrong. Do you authorize this transfer? No, I said, and let the word sit like a weight on a scale. Understood, she said. I am placing a 90-day hold on outbound transfers. We will require dual verification and an affidavit of non-authorization. I can send the template to your attorney. We can also set a verbal password. I gave her a word Margaret liked, a word no one else would guess. Password set, she said. I am assigning a case number and will monitor your file. If anyone asks for that word, hang up and call the number on your card. Kate muted the call and typed. She slid a single page across the table. Affidavit of identity and non-authorization. I signed my name the way I have since the Navy. Slow, legible, mine. Down the hall, the notary checked my license and pressed her seal with a careful hand. Back in the office, my phone buzzed with Morgan's text. Case number. Hold confirmed. Supervisor notified. Kate printed 3 letters while the paper cooled in the air. I left with a folder that felt heavier than it had an hour earlier. I drove to the branch where the E-Faces help files behave. The manager came out with polished shoes and a careful tie. I handed him the affidavit and the case number. He added a note to my profile while I watched. Outbound hold in place, he read. Verbal password required. Manual review by the manager for any change. He gave me his card. If you get a suspicious call, loop me in. We shook hands. His grip was honest enough to settle the air. From the sidewalk, the day looked ordinary, but my pulse knew better. I drove home by way of the park because watching a gate go up is a sermon you do not need a church for. The posts stood like promises. They held me up. That evening, we had a family dinner. From the sidewalk, it would have looked normal. Rebecca brought a salad and the kind of laugh that makes a room less sharp. I kept the soup simple because simple food is kind to a body that has already done enough. David and Linda arrived late. Linda set a bottle of wine on the counter and said a line about traffic that did not need to be believed. David hugged me like our chests were strangers. He wore it easily, like a borrowed jacket. We sat at the old table Margaret and I bought from a church sale. David talked about a game he did not watch. Linda said the word optics twice and the word governance once. She explained how neighbors misunderstand leadership. The words made a strange music in my kitchen. I let them play out. I answered not with speeches, but with honest sounds. Then I set my spoon down, wiped my hands on a paper napkin, and gave the room the sentence I had brought for it. My name only has value when my own hand writes it, I said. I did not add more. I watched the sentence take its chair. David's mouth opened and closed like he had forgotten how words work. Linda stared at the window as if the glass owed her a favor. Rebecca took a sip of water and set the glass down with the care of a nurse taking a pulse. No one argued. We finished our bowls. They put on coats. David hugged me again without pressure. Linda slid leftovers into her tote like a receipt for kindness. The door clicked. The apartment exhaled. An hour later, my phone rang with a number I did not know. Some nights you pick up because silence is the wrong guard. I answered. The voice was measured and confident in the way of people who practice being confident. Mr. Walker, he said, using my full name like a charge. I represent parties who prefer to handle things quietly. You have filed complaints and sent letters. You plan to speak at the HOA meeting. If you do not withdraw, we will be forced to correct the record online. There are things about your family that would not look good. He let that hang like a hook. I pressed the record button because my phone knows how to be useful. I spoke the way you speak to a man trying a cheap trick in a bright room. Sir, I said, you have reached a veteran with a folder that remembers and a lawyer who writes clean. You are recorded. Future contact goes to counsel. 2. If you have facts, bring them to the meeting and let the room hear them. He exhaled and hung up. I saved the file to the phone and to the cloud and wrote the time on an index card. Sleep did not come easily. I brewed tea and walked the rooms. I checked the locks even though May downstairs runs the lobby like a ship. I sat at the table and sorted what I knew from what I felt. The forged signature, the missing notary expiration, the attempt to move almost $400,000 out of a savings account that took me 40 years to build. The HOA fine was posted under my name without my hand on the check. The mailbox authorization that tried to move my mail into a private box, I did not rent. I wrote names and dates. I wrote questions that a room could answer without shouting. Morning brought thin light and a house that knew what to do. I emailed the recording to Kate with a short note. Anonymous caller. Threats about my complaint and my plan to speak. Number captured. Please send a cease to the phone carrier. She replied in 5 minutes. On it. Also, Morgan requests handwriting specimens at noon. Good defense. I printed Section 4.2 of the HOA bylaws and slipped it into a plastic sleeve. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. Before lunch, I walked to the UPS store. The bell over the door clanged like a stubborn truth. Karen, the manager, recognized me and gave me the kind of nod you give a neighbor in a storm. I showed her Kate's letter. She did not flinch. We have the authorization log and the DVR, she said. Agent Rivera from the postal inspectors has already called. She wants the day the form came in and the face of the person who brought it. I put a sticky note on the machine. It says, "Do not erase unless you want trouble." I thanked her, and she told me to tell that agent she would be ready. At noon, I met Morgan at the branch. She came from behind the glass with a file and a face I trusted more now than yesterday. "The wire is officially denied," she said. "The missing stamp detail tripped the review. Your affidavit closed the loop. I set a watch that pings me if your name moves in a way that does not look like you." She laid out a clean sheet and a pen that did not fight. "Please sign your name 5 times, slow and natural." I did. The marks looked like home. She scanned them in. "Good," she said. "This forces a person to look before anything moves." The afternoon became a string of small, deliberate acts. I mailed the letters certified and watched the clerk press the green return cards on with a neat, satisfied smack. I stopped at the library and photocopied the HOA bylaws. I highlighted Section 4.2 with a yellow marker that did not bleed through. I wrote the meeting agenda on an index card. Old business, ledger correction. I underlined it twice. I printed 2 extra copies of the recusal rule and slipped them into plastic sleeves because paper behaves better when paper stands up straight. Back home, I laid everything out on the table like equipment before a job. Folder, copies, ID, index cards, Margaret's photo, 2 pens, the flash drive with my recordings, labeled by date and time. I checked the files again, then again. I am not a fancy man. I am a quartermaster. I count and I place and I keep receipts. The work calmed me. The house felt square again. Late afternoon, David called. I let it roll to voicemail and listened when my breathing was even. He tried for casual. "Hey, Dad, dinner was good. We should do that more. The neighborhood page is getting wild. People are dramatic. Maybe you could lay low until it blows over. No need to stir the pot. Stir the pot." The phrase landed like a fork on a plate in the quiet. I replayed it once, then put the phone face down. After dinner, Linda texted a paragraph that read like a press release. "We all want what is best for the family. Please consider the optics of speaking at the meeting. There are private matters that can be misconstrued. We do not need a spectacle." I stared until the words lost their trick. I wrote a sentence on an index card, black ink, thick on the page. Optics are not ethics. I slid the card into the front pocket of the folder where my fingers would find it when I opened the zipper. At 9, the anonymous caller tried again. Same measured voice. New angle. "It would be unfortunate if your medical history became a topic," he said. "Some folks might think your recent surgery makes you unstable." I did not argue. "This call is recorded," I said. "Future contact goes to my lawyer." Click. I sent the audio to Kate. She replied with one word. "Excellent. It is a comfort when your lawyer loves evidence more than adjectives." I saved the files to the cloud and to the little flash drive because 2 of anything that matters is a good rule. I packed the bag for the morning the way a man packs for a storm. Letters, copies, 2 pens, notebook, Margaret's photo, ID, flash drive. A small roll of certified mail stickers I did not need but liked to carry. The oranges went on top, bright and ordinary. It looked like a care package for a room that needed to remember how to behave. I set the bag by the door. I washed the mug I had dirtied. I laid the towel flat so it would dry properly. Sleep came in fits, then softened. I dreamed of a gate on good hinges. It opened without complaint and closed without noise. When I woke, the sky was pale and the house honest. Coffee, toast, hands steady on the mug. I stood at the window and watched the street get ready for its own work. I thought about all the people who would take their 2 minutes at some meeting today and try to remind the room what bylaws are for. I decided to stand with them in my own way. Before a quick check-in with Kate, I looked over the table one more time. Everything I needed waited in straight lines. Kate had fresh copies when I arrived and a plan that did not waste a word. "You will go first if the chair does it right," she said. "If not, rise and call for a point of order. Keep your sentences short. Look at the chair when you say community. Do not look at anyone else. Do not use the word apology. Use the word practice." She tucked the cease and preserve letter for the phone carrier into the file and handed me a spare. On my way home, Morgan called to close the loop. "The wire is officially denied," she said. "Your affidavit is posted to the case. We added fresh handwriting specimens and the verbal password. Manager approval is required to lift the hold. If anyone calls today claiming to be from us, never confirm a password. Hang up and call me on my direct number." I thanked her. "My dad served," she said. "He used to tell me paper is a promise with a spine. You sound like him." I told her that was the best thing I had heard all week. The afternoon was for small preparation. I checked batteries. I charged my phone. I taped my index cards inside the folder so they would not flutter when I stood. I ironed a shirt that buttons without argument. I set shoes by the door that would not squeak on tile. I breathed. I told myself clearly, they think I have already lost. They are wrong. The game only started when I learned where the levers are. This is where an older version of me would have called David to give him one last chance. I did not. I had already offered the only words that mattered. My name only has value when my own hand writes it. From here, the room would decide if it wanted to behave. I would help it remember. I would bring the line, and I would bring proof that could not be talked away. When the sky went pink and then dark, I turned off the lamp and let the house keep me. The radiator sighed. The clock kept time like a metronome with good manners. I lay down and counted breaths, not because I was afraid, but because breath counting tells my body the war is over and the work is orderly. Tomorrow would be chairs and microphones and faces I know too well. I would bring my folder. I would bring my sentence. I would bring the nails that evidence becomes when you press them to a table and ask them to hold fast. That night, I rehearsed in a low voice so the walls could hear my promise. I would not rant. I would not trade insults. I would read dates and amounts, and then I would look at the chair and ask a simple question. Who signed for money that did not belong to them? I stacked the letters in order, slid the audio files onto a tiny drive, and wrote 3 lines on a card. Signature, stamp, recusal. I pictured the blue seal, the missing expiration, the fine posted without my hand. Tomorrow I would turn every page and every number into a nail and pin it to the table where everyone could see it, where excuses could not wriggle free. If they tried to drown me in noise, I would wait, breathe, and start again from the top, because patience is a lever, and levers move heavy things when used right. I woke before the alarm. Coffee, coat, bag. I slipped Margaret's photo into the front pocket so it would greet me when the zipper opened. I put an orange in my coat. I picked up the notebook and wrote one more line, the line that carried me from shock to steadiness. They think I am weak, but they will see their mistake. I tapped the period with the tip of my pen so the ink would sink. I locked the door behind me and walked toward the day that was waiting to be set straight. I arrived at the community room early, the kind of early that lets you hear how a space breathes before it decides what it is. Rows of folding chairs made straight aisles, metal feet scuffing the tile like cautious footsteps. A paper sign on the table read, "Owners and Interested Parties," 2 blue pens tied to strings like small leashes. I printed my name the way I always do, plain and legible, then stepped aside for a woman carrying a thermos and a plate of cookies wrapped in plastic. Susan waved from the corner where she and Nancy were sorting handouts. Kate, my attorney, stood with Tom by the side wall, reviewing a single page I had copied onto the kind of thick paper that does not curl. I kept my speech small and in my pocket. Community is a ledger of small corrections. Make this one. I read the line to myself until it sounded like something I could say without shaking. Brian Howell checked the gavel and the microphone, a man measuring a river before steering a boat across. Tyler from management arranged nameplates on the long table. Brian in the center, 2 board members to his right, 2 to his left. Linda took a seat at the far end, eyes on her phone, posture so straight it looked like a performance. David slipped in behind the second row and chose an aisle seat, hands folded like a student told to behave. He looked at me, then looked away. I let him. Margaret's photo sat in the front pocket of my binder like a small anchor. I touched the edge and breathed in and out until the noise of other people helped carry the weight of my own breath. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. A courier in a thin jacket cut through the crowd before the meeting began. He asked for me in a voice that tried not to be part of anything. I raised my hand. He handed over a narrow envelope with my name typed in a font that wanted to be official. The paper inside carried the smell of a basement office. It was a 1-page acknowledgment stating that I, James Walker, consented to transfer any beneficial interest to David Walker and Linda Walker regarding HOA disputes, fines, and resolutions. My signature was there, at least the version of it someone thought would work. The date was last week. The notary seal had no commission number. My stomach went cold and flat. I did not give the room a show. I took a photo of the page, front and back, slid the original into a clear sleeve, and handed it to Kate. She looked once, looked twice, and nodded. "We preserve this," she said. "Then we use it." Neighbors filled the chairs until the aisles went tight, and the back wall wore a row of winter coats. May, our building manager, found a seat near the door like a polite deputy. A retired mail carrier named Frank leaned against the far wall with his cap tucked in his hand, careful and ready. The room smelled like wool, coffee, and salt. When Brian rapped the gavel twice, the echo climbed up to the ceiling tiles and came back as order. Brian called the roll. Minutes approved, no drama. He glanced at counsel, then at the crowd. "Old business," he said. "Ledger correction for Unit Maple Row. Mr. Walker, you asked to be recognized." My knees remembered my age as I stood, but the rest of me remembered my promise. I set 3 documents on the table where the front row could see. My affidavit of non-authorization, the bank's letter confirming a freeze on outbound transfers from my savings account, and a copy of last spring's minutes showing the pergola vote. I kept my voice simple because simple lines hold when a room wants to bend them. My name was put where my hand had not been, I said. The bank blocked an attempted transfer of nearly $400,000 that was pushed with a dead commission stamp and a forged signature. The association posted a fine to my ledger without verifying the hand on the check. Last spring, the chair voted on her own pergola extension without recusing under Section 4.2. I am not here for an apology. I am here for practice. Adopt a conflict of interest acknowledgement tonight. Require signature specimens for owner files. Require ID for any payment above $100. Put it in ink so people do not have to carry rooms on their backs. Kate raised the new envelope so the board could see it. 10 minutes ago, a forged acknowledgement was delivered to Mr. Walker. It states he consents to transfer his interest to the very people who stand to benefit. The signature is false. The date is wrong. The seal includes no commission number. We request that management preserve it, that counsel refer it to the appropriate authorities, and that a second copy be made for the bank. Brian read the page, handed it to counsel, and looked back at me with a face I understood. The face of a man whose hands had just found a wheel he could hold. I turned the old minutes so the first row could read the line that had lived in my head for a week. Item 3. Architectural variance for pergola extension at 14 Maple Row. Motion by Chair Linda Walker. Second by Treasurer. Vote 3-2. Recusal not recorded. My finger rested under the words like a ruler. Section 4.2 requires recusal when a board member has a material interest, I said. No heat, no sarcasm. Only the rule spoken in a room that needed it. The murmur that rose sounded like a tide that knew where the shore should be. Linda stared at the table, then lifted her chin a notch. "There's context," she said. "We expedited approvals to benefit the block. The pergola improved property values. The fine followed the bylaws. We're volunteers." She pushed the word volunteers as if it were a shield big enough to hide behind. I answered without changing my breath. "I'm a volunteer too. I volunteer to keep my name where it belongs and to ask you to do the work the word volunteer actually means. I volunteer for practice over performance. I volunteer for rules that do not change their clothes for friends." The side door opened again and the air shifted a degree. A woman in a dark blazer entered with the quiet certainty of a person who does not need an introduction, but offers one anyway. "Good evening," she said. "I'm Agent Rivera with the Postal Inspection Service. We are investigating a mailbox authorization that appears to have been stamped without proper ID and a notary whose commission may have expired 2 years ago. The UPS store has preserved its DVR. We have interviewed staff. If anyone here has received mail on behalf of another party, I encourage you to speak with me after the meeting." She did not look at anyone in particular. She did not need to. The room understood where the floor was now. David stared at his hands. Linda did not move. Counsel nodded as if a hinge had finally oiled itself. Brian adjusted the single sheet he had kept near his folder. "Management and counsel have prepared a conflict of interest acknowledgement for board officers," he said. "It's simple. Disclose, recuse, sign. We will adopt it tonight." He passed the form to his right. Pens clicked. Ink scratched. The sound was homely and beautiful. I watched Linda's hand hesitate over the line with her name. The pause lasted long enough to learn something. She signed, small and careful. Relief moved along the back row like a breeze that had decided to be kind. I slid a small digital recorder across the table to the counselor. "Last night, I received an anonymous call from someone claiming to be legal staff. The caller told me to withdraw my complaint or my reputation would be smeared online." I recorded the call. The number is preserved. Counsel listened to a few seconds, then pressed stop. "Thank you," he said. "We will handle it." A woman I knew only from a library workshop stepped from her seat and held up a card. "State Notary Board," she said. "Name's Judy. Bring any questionable seals to my office. We will review commissions and dates." She did not glare. She did not need to. Her voice carried the authority of ink and a logbook. Brian looked at the room. "The acknowledgement is before us," he said. "All in favor." Hands rose. A yes, another yes, a third yes, spoken like it had been waiting. Linda's yes came late and quietly. The motion carried. Applause started in the corner, small and decent, then moved like rain under an eave. It wasn't triumph. It was relief, stitched to gratitude. I kept my promise and read only what I had planned. "Community is a ledger of small corrections. Please make this one." I sat and felt my shoulders settle into the back of the chair, an old house finding its foundation. For a minute, the meeting returned to ordinary business. Snow removal, roof bids, mailbox keys. I let the cadence of it wash through the room and smooth the edges. Then the courier reappeared with a second envelope, this one addressed to management. Brian opened it, read, and lifted his head. "A formal complaint has been filed regarding a forged acknowledgement presented tonight," he announced. "The complaint names unknown parties and asks that meeting footage be preserved. Consider it preserved." He turned to counsel. Counsel nodded. The clerk wrote, pen pushing into the paper like it meant it. A teacher in the last row raised her voice just enough. "We can't have leaders who sign their own permission slips," she said. "Even my second graders know that." Laughter rose once, quick and kind, followed by steady clapping. Linda's face folded in on itself in a way that made her look younger and older at the same time. David's jaw worked like he was trying to swallow a stone. Linda stood. Her chair made a sound like a brake grabbed at the wrong time. "We are doing our best," she said. "If this is how you treat volunteers, no one will serve," Kate answered before I had to. "This is not punishment," she said. "This is governance." Brian lifted the gavel a quarter inch, and the room calmed itself like a trained animal that still remembers the field. The vote to censure came almost by accident, a simple line in the corrected minutes reading, "Chair recused self-retroactively. Board censure recorded." No one shouted. The words did the work. I watched Brian's pen write them as if he were laying trackboards across mud. When he adjourned, the sound of the gavel was a wooden exhale. Coats slid on, voices lowered. The teacher put a ridiculous hat on a toddler who disapproved in silence. Nancy slipped a copy of the signed acknowledgment into my folder with the tenderness of a person placing a photograph where it belongs. Susan pressed a cookie into my hand. I took a bite and tasted oats and cinnamon and a kind of mercy. Linda approached with David half a step behind. "You embarrassed us," she said, her voice clipped around the edges. I shook my head and let the words leave before mine. "No," I said. "The paper embarrassed you. I asked the room to honor its own rules. If that felt like shame, the remedy lives in the rules." David looked at the door, then at his shoes, then at me. He opened his mouth, then closed it, and found nothing better than breath. Agent Rivera waited near the exit. We didn't need to speak, but we did. "Your store manager is a dream witness," she said. "The DVR is safe. The notary issue is already moving. Behavior speaks louder than names." I nodded. "Thank you for bringing your spine to the room," I said. She smiled without letting me make a hero of her. "Paper and practice," she said. "That's how we win." She left with a bakery box someone had pressed into her hands, stamped with tiny postmarks that made her laugh. Outside, the night felt cleansed by its own cold. Our breath rose and disappeared. Tom clapped my shoulder once like a man testing a beam he'd just set. "Good span," he said. We walked to my building, 3 blocks of quiet that sounded like rest. The elevator was slow on purpose. In my apartment, the radiator hissed as if it had been in the room with me all night and agreed with my choices. I opened the binder on the table and placed the new documents in order. My affidavit, the bank letter, the forged page in its sleeve, the signed acknowledgment, and the corrected minutes. I wrote in the leather notebook because writing makes truth hold still. Recusal adopted. Signature specimens required. ID for payments above 100. Threat call preserved. Forged assignment delivered and logged. Postal inspector present. The room behaved. Period. I tapped the period twice until the ink settled. My phone lit with David's name and the old photo he still hasn't changed. I let it go to voicemail because I no longer answer panic. He left a message that looped from anger to pleading to fog. "Dad, this went too far. People are talking. I never meant to hurt you. Maybe we can make a deal. Maybe if you don't escalate this, we can talk." I saved the file and set the phone face down. I poured tea and watched steam rise in a thin, straight line. When morning found the windows, an email from Brian found my inbox. Conflict of interest acknowledgement attached, signed by all board members. Minutes corrected and posted. Chair recused self retroactively from the pergola vote. Board censure recorded. A new line I hadn't expected stood at the bottom like a fence you could finally see. Management will add signature specimens to owner files for payment verification. I exhaled the way a man does when a tight belt finally loosens a notch. A second email arrived from Morgan at the bank. Wire formally denied. Fraud case escalated. Your savings cannot be moved without an in-person ID and the verbal password we set yesterday. I wrote one sentence in the notebook. The ship turned. By noon, the neighborhood Facebook page had turned the meeting into pictures and captions. Someone posted the index card I had read. Someone else posted a photo of the toddler in his unhappy hat. I didn't read the comments. I closed the laptop and opened the window a crack. Winter air came in clean and honest. I carried a copy of the acknowledgment to the bank and left it with Morgan, who smiled the way professionals do when a system finally rewards good behavior. "People think the bank is the guard," she said, "but most days we are just the lock that needs the right key. Today you brought keys." I told her the room had helped. She told me the room had learned. Late afternoon brought one more turn. Tyler called to say the agenda for next month would list recusals as its own first item, not buried under other business. He sounded tired in a good way. Counsel emailed a clean PDF of the signed forms and asked me to keep a copy in my records. The teacher from the back row stopped me on the sidewalk, touched my sleeve, and said it felt like school in the best sense. People learned something and went home calmer. Agent Rivera texted that the notary matter had been referred for review and that the store's log and DVR were secured. I texted back one word. Thanks. Frank tipped his cap and said, "Good span," and a photo arrived of my index card taped to the fridge next to a grocery list. Back home, May buzzed me from the lobby. "A gentleman with a clipboard," she said, "the shoes of a man who stamps things. Want to meet him, or should I send him away with a cookie?" I went down. The process server smiled like he knew this building had earned its quiet. "Looking for Linda Walker," he said. I confirmed I couldn't accept service for her and pointed him toward the association's official address. He tipped his cap. "Notary board," he said. "They never ring when it's convenient." I told him the truth seldom does. He laughed, thanked May for the cookie anyway, and went back out into the weather that had stopped pretending to be friendly. I ended the day the way you end a long drive, by placing both hands on the table and letting the stillness do its job. I opened the notebook and wrote one last line. They thought I was too weak to hold this line. Today they watched a paper stand up and walk. I closed the cover and felt the house agree. Feeling unseen and dismissed is heavy, isn't it? If you believe every person deserves basic fairness and to be seen for who they are, comment the keyword justice. Now watch what they will do to change that and how I will answer. The night after the meeting, I slept for the first time in weeks without waking to the sound of my own thoughts. The radiator hissed like a lullaby, steady and warm, and the street outside carried only the hum of cars going where they belonged. When morning came, the light fell across my table where the binder lay open with its papers in order. Affidavits, minutes, bank letters, copies of the forged documents. They looked less like burdens now and more like trophies of survival. I touched the edge of Margaret's picture and whispered, "We did it." They saw the truth. By noon, word had spread through Maple Row faster than any official notice could travel. Neighbors who had been polite but distant before now stopped me in the hallway, shook my hand, or touched my shoulder with the quiet kind of respect that does not need long speeches. "You stood tall," Frank said, tipping his old postal cap. Not many would have had the backbone. Susan left a basket of muffins outside my door, no note, just the smell of blueberries filling the hall. And by evening, Brian Howell sent a short email confirming what I already knew. Linda had resigned as HOA chair effective immediately. Her words were careful, to preserve the dignity of the board, but everyone read the truth beneath them. She hadn't stepped down out of grace. She had been forced out by her own actions. David's number lit up my phone again. He had called 3 times since the meeting, left one message that swung from rage to plea. "Dad, this has gone too far. Maybe we can work something out. Maybe we can start over." I read the transcript on my voicemail, but did not play the sound. The hurt in my chest had already done its damage. I would not invite more of it into my living room. I deleted the message, then blocked the number. The silence that followed was not empty. It was clean. Kate met me the next day at the bank, where Morgan had prepared the final forms. The savings account that had been the target of David's scheme now stood secure, the attempted transfer permanently denied. Together, we moved the $400,000 into a trust account under my control, with 2 clear stipulations: no access without my signature and Morgan's in-person verification, and no family beneficiary could touch a cent without written approval from me. Kate explained every clause, and I initialed each one like a man hammering nails into wood he wanted to last. When it was done, I exhaled and felt my shoulders finally ease. But I wasn't done. Not this time. For too many years, I had believed that protecting my children meant giving them more than I kept for myself. Tuition checks, down payments, even that $50,000 wedding I'd convinced myself was an investment in happiness. I thought I was buying loyalty. I thought I was buying love. What I learned was that love cannot be bought, and loyalty not rooted in respect is a weed. So I chose something different. From the trust, I carved $60,000 and wrote the first donation to the Rally Home Foundation, a group building tiny houses for veterans who had nowhere to go. I thought of Margaret's brother, who came back from Vietnam with more scars than stories, and how he had died alone in a trailer by the river. I told the director, "This is money my son tried to take from me. Instead, let it build a roof for a man who earned it." The woman cried on the phone. I did not cry, but I felt something break free inside me, like a knot finally loosening. The rest of the money stayed safe, growing where David could not touch it. My house, the one Margaret and I had built brick by brick over decades, no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like a battlefield. Every room carried echoes of betrayal. David's hand on forged papers, Linda's voice twisting bylaws to suit herself. So I called a realtor and told her, "Find me something smaller, something honest, something mine." Shabu. Within weeks, I signed for a modest condo near the park, 200,000 second floor, with windows that opened toward trees where children laughed after school. The day I carried the last box inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, whispering to Margaret again. We are free now. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. Meanwhile, David and Linda's world shrank like a balloon with a slow leak. Neighbors avoided them in the grocery store. The board stripped Linda of any signing authority. Even the couples who once smiled politely at block parties crossed the street when they approached. By summer, their house stood with weeds in the yard and a for rent sign tilting on the lawn. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, cheaper and smaller than anything they'd known. I heard it from Susan, who said she saw Linda carrying boxes with her head down, David trailing behind like a shadow. Part of me wanted to feel pity. Most of me only felt release. In my new home, mornings became simple again. Coffee by the window, the smell of the park drifting up with children's laughter. I took walks with Frank, who insisted I keep pace even when his knees complained. I cooked meals for myself and left the kitchen clean each night, no longer scrubbing resentment into the dishes. On Saturdays, I sat in the community garden, pulling weeds with my hands in the soil, remembering that life grows best when tended with patience. One evening, as the sun burned orange against the park trees, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. David's voice came through, thin and strained. "Dad, I'm sorry. Linda and we lost everything. I don't know what to do." For a moment I closed my eyes and let the old ache press against me. But then I opened them and said what I had waited too long to say. "You lost everything because you tried to steal what wasn't yours. I don't need an apology. I need peace. And I won't trade it for your chaos." I hung up before he could reply. That was the last time I heard his voice. In my leather notebook, the same one I carried into every meeting, I wrote, "Property does not define family. Respect does. Without it, blood is just blood." The ink sank into the page like a promise, heavy and permanent. For the first time since Margaret passed, I believed I could live by it. I began attending meetings at the Veterans Foundation, not as a donor, but as a volunteer. Hammering nails, painting walls, serving coffee to men who told stories that made my problems look smaller, but my choices look braver. Each evening I returned home tired, but the kind of tired that feels like a life lived right. One of the directors handed me a letter after a shift. "We'd like you to join our advisory board," she said. "You've walked through fire and came out with your heart intact. We need that here." I folded the letter into my pocket, smiled, and thought, maybe this is my new beginning. The shadows of betrayal no longer followed me the way they once had. They lived behind me, not beside me. David and Linda had their path, shrinking into the corners of a life they tried to steal. I had mine, opening into something Margaret would have been proud of. I looked at her photo each night and whispered the lesson I wanted the world to know. Truth always wins. Respect is the only wealth no one can forge. And I am, at last, my own man again. And as I closed the notebook that night, I felt something stir. Not dread, not grief. Hope. A letter sat unopened on my table, stamped with the return address of a community group I had never met. An invitation to join, to build, to belong. I smiled and said quietly to the empty room, "This might be the start of something new." The first morning of my new routine began with quiet sunlight pouring across the small living room of my condo. The windows faced the park, and when I opened them, the sound of children playing filtered in, mixed with the rustle of leaves. It was nothing like the grand house Margaret and I had built over decades, but it was honest. Honest walls, honest floorboards, and honest silence. No lies written into the paperwork, no schemes hiding in the attic. Just a clean start. I made my coffee, black as always, and carried it to the little table by the window. The park looked alive. For the first time in years, I felt alive too. I began volunteering with the community group that had sent me the invitation. We planted flowers along the walking path, built benches for neighbors, and organized Saturday lunches for veterans who had no family nearby. My hands, once stiff with grief and anger, now found rhythm in hammering nails and brushing paint across fresh wood. People called me by name, smiled without hesitation, and treated me as one of their own. It was not the family I had once imagined, but in many ways it felt more real. After all, these people respected me without expecting to own me. The condo itself became a sanctuary. Small, yes, but manageable. Every corner spoke of freedom. The leather chair by the bookshelf where I read in the evenings. The picture of Margaret on the mantel, her smile steady, her eyes kind. The kitchen where I cooked simple meals. Soup, roasted chicken, even pancakes on Sundays when the mood struck. And every morning the same ritual. Coffee by the window, notebook open, a few lines scribbled as reminders of what mattered. Respect is wealth. Truth is protection. Peace is earned. The lessons from all that had happened clung to me like scripture. For parents, I knew the truth at last. Love without boundaries is not love at all. It is an open door for betrayal. I had given David and Linda too much, believing that sacrifice would bind them to me. Tuition payments, the down payment on their first house, the endless bailouts. But none of it built gratitude. It only fed entitlement. If there is a lesson for parents, it is this. Give, but do not surrender your dignity. Your children must learn that respect is part of the inheritance, and it cannot be bought with checks or titles. For children, the warning is even clearer. Greed may win for a season, but it will destroy the soil it grows in. David and Linda wanted easy money, fast control, the satisfaction of owning what they never earned. In their hunger, they tore apart the very family that had carried them. Their marriage, I heard, had grown strained. Neighbors whispered of arguments loud enough to be heard through thin apartment walls. I did not need to know the details, too. I only needed to understand the principle. Children who try to rise on their parents' ruin will fall, and they will fall hard. And for people everywhere in this modern world where shortcuts and schemes seem to glitter, I say this. Truth and character are the last currencies that never lose value. A forged signature can be spotted. A fake notary stamp can be proven false. A stolen account can be frozen. But dignity, your name, your word, remains the one asset no one can forge, no matter how clever their trick. One afternoon, as I returned from the park, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The handwriting was David's, familiar but somehow older, almost shaky. I stood in the hallway staring at it, my keys still in my hand. For a long while, I did not move. When I finally opened it, the letter inside was filled with regret. Words like sorry, mistake, and forgive. He admitted to the forgery, admitted to Linda's pressure, and admitted to weakness. He wrote that they had nothing left. He asked me to meet. Just once, Dad, just once. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer beneath Margaret's photo. Then I whispered into the room, I don't need their apology. I have my life now. It was not bitterness that guided me, but clarity. My boundary had been written in bold ink across court records and bank ledgers. To step back now would not be forgiveness. It would be a surrender. and I was done surrendering. Their life went on without me. I heard pieces of it, scraps carried through neighbors or old friends who still saw them around town. They rented a modest apartment near the highway. David worked long hours at a warehouse. Linda took a part-time job at a diner. They argued, reconciled, and argued again. I wished them no harm, but I carried no burden for them anymore. They were learning the hard lessons life had spared them for too long. Meanwhile, I lived lighter. I joined the local library's book club, where we sat in a circle each Thursday, arguing about plots and laughing about endings. I planted tomatoes in the community garden and traded recipes with a retired nurse named Helen, who became a good friend. On weekends, I visited the Veterans Project, walking through the small homes we built, hearing men say, "This feels like the first place I belong." Each word was a brick in my own healing. One small event sealed the journey for me. I found Margaret's old pocket watch tucked into a drawer I hadn't opened in years. On the back, she had once etched a phrase with her careful hand. "Small anchor, big storm." She always said it to remind me that even in chaos, one steady truth can hold you firm. I turned the watch in my hand and whispered, "The storm has passed, Margaret, and I am still standing." I live now in the rhythm of ordinary days, and I treasure them. Morning coffee, afternoons at the park, evenings with books and music soft in the background. Nothing flashy, nothing grand, but everything honest. And that honesty is the wealth I never knew I was missing. So, what are the lessons? For parents, never let love erase your boundaries. Protect your dignity as carefully as you protect your children. For children, do not let greed blind you to the hands that fed you. Gratitude is worth more than gold. And for all of us, in a world filled with shortcuts, remember that truth and character are the only fortunes no one can steal. As I sit here tonight, the city lights glowing faintly through my window, I know this. Family is not defined by who shares your blood, but by who respects your soul. And respect, true, lasting respect, is the one inheritance that endures. I close my notebook with a final line. I am free. I am worthy. I am whole. And with that, my story rests. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.